All right. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am Ricky Giacchini, the VP of Product at CloudRadial. Super excited because we're talking about our CloudRadial and Pia self-service requests to automation. How do you go from there? I'll give you a spoiler. It's really tough to do in CloudRadial by itself, which is why the Pia dudes are here to help me make it easy and make it sexy because we got some talking to do about how you get there from very little to all the way and automated 100%. Uh, Gents, especially James, is the EVP of Strategic Accounts. Give us a little intro for you, please.
Thanks, Ricky, and welcome everybody. Great to be here. This has been a long-awaited union, so super excited to see this in action. My background is one of the early founders of Pia. I came from the MSP where Pia was born out of. So I look after everything strategic regarding our high net worth clients and vendor partnerships such as CloudRadial. I'm based out of Salt Lake City now, been over in the States for a few years, just bracing for the cold weather as we speak. So again, excited to be here, Ricky.
Thank you very much for joining us. Also with us, Thomas McCaffrey, aka Tom, who is going to be running through the nuts and bolts of it with me. Hi, Tom. Tell us about yourself a little bit. Let's talk about you.
Ricky, thanks so much. And hey everyone, fantastic to be here. Yeah, I'm one of the project specialists here at Pia. I've been here nearly 3 years now. And like Ricky said, I'm in the nuts and bolts. I'm in the wires. I'm in the background. And honestly that's what I love. So I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to show you guys a lot of kind of the background, how everything connects, right? What is the magic secret sauce that brings everything CloudRadial, everything automation, brings it all together, ultimately for a fantastic experience for you guys. So happy to get going and crack into it.
Amazing. Yeah, and for those that don't know, for those who signed up and was like, automations, that sounds interesting, and joined, this is a very, very, very brief PowerPoint. We're going to go right to talking about logistics and talking within CloudRadial, within Pia, and going through the mechanics of it. So forgive the preamble, but yes, if you've never heard of it, CloudRadial is a suite of products specifically because we're talking about automations. We're talking about form automations for clients and really how to go from, again, nothing to a tangible interface all the way to self-service of very common requests. CloudRadial is a platform to do that. Again, we're a platform, but our unified client portal, UCP, you may see it online, is that mechanism. That is the client portal that touches that stuff and is how they access the forms. And again, how we hook into Pia will be revealed shortly. Tell us a little about Pia. I know I left a very meager slide, but what does Pia do and how does it work in general, irrespective of CloudRadial, fellows?
Yeah, absolutely, Ricky. So Pia is a AI-driven automation platform that looks after end-to-end service delivery. So as I touched on earlier, we were born out of quite a large MSP in Australia, solving a problem internally for ourselves about how do we grow, how do we scale the business. We weren't fond of just adding headcount every time we put on more clients, and also solving the problem for consistency of service delivery. We're very passionate about delivering a great service to our clients, but human error slips in from time to time, and we really needed to solve that. Automation was the key, and that marriage between AI and automation really played a big part in us really driving the business. 3 years down the track, and here we are with hundreds of partners globally, serving the MSP community that we love. So that's the cliff notes there. I want to save most of the airtime for you guys, getting into the nuts and bolts of it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, if you've just joined us and you're confused as to what's happening, we're talking about that challenge of how you actually have automation, how it scales, how you multiply it, track it across client environments, how you basically get people that trigger to move on. Now, just because I talked a little bit about it, Tom's going to come in a moment and talk about the specifics of Pia, what it can do, how it works, and kind of the step-by-step of how it works for a couple of very popular forms. You'll see which ones that come up for CloudRadial all the time. I'm going to show a couple minutes of CloudRadial stuff, specifically what you can do without Pia, just the basic stuff and why it really makes sense, I think, if you're going to start scaling, start doing the automation thing, to look more towards a dedicated tool that can really handle these complex self-service requests. So I'll go ahead and do it right now. A little plug for us for cloudradio.com/demo. I'll spoil it for you. We're not going to go into super big details because it's only a 30 minutes, a little bit of a tease webinar in the sense that like I want to show you how it works. But if there is anybody, I know we have Crystal running the webinar in the background. If anybody has specific requests, we're also trying to gauge and understand what you want to see built. So again, being cognizant that this is only 30 minutes. If there's a type of use case you want to see, if there's a type of form you want to see, if there's some interesting things you want to see built with Pia, we're more than happy to do an expanded webinar that focuses more of a deep dive workshop on those things as well. So I know I'm flashing the cloudradio.com/demo. Throw it in the chat. We're trying to figure out if we're rather which forms are the most interesting ones to look at. So without further ado, let me go ahead and pull up my portal here and we'll get started. Again, I want to say the story that we usually run into, and again, this is probably your story because we see this all the time. People come to us and they say, "I want a client interface, I want a portal," whether they know that or not. And even though CloudRadial has a bunch of stuff, it has QBR tool capabilities, it has kind of intranet like courses and bookmarks. Basically, almost always the first thing that people come to us is to try to standardize their requests because their users are coming in with emails and phone calls, and the journey going from, even though it's 2025, people still call, people still email just emails that say help or onboarding a new user tomorrow, and that's it. And that sucks. We know that sucks. It sucks for you, it sucks for the user because it's like pulling teeth getting all the information. So what does that journey look like going from nothing, right? Emails and phone calls all the way to a complete self-service onboarding that the user triggers and it's executed and it all works wonderfully. Let's talk about it. So again, the beginning in CloudRadial terms, sans automation is you get this shiny new portal, and basically the first form that you would be able to spin up, one of our starter forms, is a new user request, right? I'm going to focus on onboardings just because they're one of the most common things that pop up. Now, by default, the way that CloudRadial works, and you're going to see how this works with Pia intertwined as well, is we're connected to your PSA system. We can do it via email as well if you really want to. But the idea is that as we capture and structure the information, it goes through to your PSA, right? So instead of new user starts tomorrow, you can make sure that if they follow the form, they get the stuff that they need. Again, first name, last name, the access, do they need a laptop, all that kind of stuff, and all the goodies that come with it. But in terms of automation, there's a big fat zero, right? Because what we're really doing here is just capturing it and sending it over, which is a big step up if you've had nothing and you've had this unstructured data. But you guys aren't here for the unstructured data big step up webinar. You're here for the automation bit. So what can we offer out of the box? And where's that handoff point to Pia? If you have CloudRadial has three versions, really: a starter, professional, and enterprise. Professional and enterprise is more geared towards that automation buildup. Starter, you can build and get started with the forms. Inside of CloudRadial is what I'll say a very simple automation engine. I say simple not because it doesn't do much, but because it doesn't offer as much visibility and trackability as a dedicated automation tool. So CloudRadial automations are built to be drag and drop, simple tasks. In my demo tenant, I've got quite a few built up. And the biggest thing I see, right, with a lot of our partners is that just because you have the capability to do it doesn't necessarily mean that capability is super, inherently easy, because there's a lot of open-ended questions to automation. So when we look at a specific automation and how it's built within CloudRadial, there's a few very powerful things you can do, but you kind of have to know what you're doing with them. So this is kind of the upside and the downside. A client portal tool is built to do a lot of cool stuff. Automations is one of those things. It's not a dedicated tool. So when we look at it, stuff like, adding it to a planner or creating an opportunity in your PSA, or most commonly doing stuff like webhooks, is super interesting, because when we have these webhook capabilities, basically what we're saying is, oh, my webhook thing didn't even pop up. Oh no, it's not working. Let's pick a different one. Like creating a new disk cleanup is another interesting one. We look at the stacked up things that we can do with our automation jobs, and we can start saying, okay, running data jobs to clean up programs, or sending a webhook request to Power Functions, or really any tool you want. I've seen this done with Postman, but again, I want to be realistic. The number one complaint we get is, where do we get started and how do we get started? Now, we also have a GitHub that I'll save you the expense of showing it and going through it, that kind of has some sample things. But most commonly, what people do is they build these different types of automations, and then what they'll do is, as they go into that form, it may be that onboarding form that we looked at before, the way that you actually ingest and inject that automation in there is we treat it like a question type. So again, very brief, but as you build a standard form, there's not a lot of complexity or difficulty to building a form in CloudRadial or anywhere else. You just build a question in. You can add a question type of text or email or whatever you want, but one of those question types is the automation. So logistically, the way that it works in CloudRadial is you go from I've got emails and phone calls to I've built a couple things with, my subject and comments and email and phone number to I've built requests that when the user hits submit, that webhook gets fired, the planner stuff gets added, the data quick job gets ran, which is starting to introduce some power, right? But you can see that there's a big gulf from cleaning up, running a disk cleanup job and maybe adding somebody to a group to having all the nuances that it takes to get to a full power form, right? Like an onboarding form may require a lot of these. Is it possible to build these in CloudRadial? Yes, it is. Do you want to do it in CloudRadial? I think that's where we might want to talk about why Pia is here and why the partnership is so strong. We get this request a lot, which is basically how do you get the power of an automation form from a tool dedicated to doing that thing that is really good at doing that one thing into a platform that is more Swiss Army knife, is more, omni tool. So you look at it and it's like, we see a lot of people saying, just because I can, do I really want to? Now, what Pia looks like in here, and I'll pass it off to Tom to show you what it looks like on the back end as an example. I'll show you one example of a simple form, and then we'll look at a more common one. We've taken the time, like James was saying, to work with Pia to make sure that the experience is natural, meaning that Pia has a completely different mechanism and ecosystem to work their forms. But at the end of the day, what we wanted from the CloudRadial side is one interface, one smooth experience, one example that a user can go in and click, whether it's a built-in CloudRadial form, whether it's a Pia form, have that get invoked, and then have Pia be the brain behind the automation that actually runs the different forms and does it. So you can see that without looking too different, really it's the same exact buttons and everything. This thing is actually running the requests and doing the things for me. So you can see that what's happening is we are bringing in the Pia form, we are invoking it. This is a generic, simple support request, right? I want something fixed. I'm at the office. It's with my desk phone. Ta-da, 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 right? So I'm going to go through and do a very basic one. And then what's happening is just like the form that we saw within CloudRadial, this form gets submitted. In this case, I'm connected to ConnectWise. That form will get created inside of ConnectWise, just like ours does. And then that form is then logged and tracked, and we can move forward with solving it. Now, this is a basic example of something that captures a lot more information than CloudRadial and can get triggered. But you're not here to see generic tickets. The stuff that's more interesting is stuff like, hey, what happens when you want to go through, say, a new user onboarding? And you can see the details to that one are much more complex, right? First names, there's last names, the titles, the departments, who's the manager. And what Pia brings to the table that complements CloudRadial really well is even the ability to invoke, like lookups and stuff. So we know who the managers are and what's happening. So when we look at the automation side from CloudRadial's bit, we purposely make it seem just like any other form. And I'll talk about what that looks like maybe a little bit closer to the end of the webinar, but I want to turn it over to Tom to basically say what's happening on the Pia side, what level of customization, and again, being cognizant that it's only 30 minutes for you guys, can't go into all the details, but let's talk about how it goes from nothing to an onboarding experience like this. Tom, would you mind taking over and showing me all the stuff that I honestly don't know very well, the technicalities of the Pia forms?
Absolutely, Ricky. Yeah, absolutely. I'd be honored to. Let me go ahead and share my screen here if I can work out Zoom. And I'll start taking you guys through what kind of happens in the background. So what we're looking at here is this is the Pia portal. So this is that kind of the back end that Ricky was talking about here. And before I do, I just want to say as well, like, in terms of everything you guys know and love about CloudRadial, like Ricky's absolutely right. How many times do you get kind of that email, that document, right? And it comes through and you have to pick it apart and get those details, right? So CloudRadial is giving you that point of getting that detail in, getting it done. And then typically it would be the job of the engineer to say, right, well, I need to do this request, right? I need to get to the client's environment, whether that's logging into their 365, maybe that's even remoting onto their local DC and start creating the user in standard AD. This is where Pia comes in. This is where we take all the information, everything that CloudRadial has asked the client, or they filled in, everything they've got from that form. We're going to have access to that, and we're going to start utilizing it for our automations. So this is a pretty basic dashboard. This is just showing the demo account that Ricky was just connected to. And there's only a few things in here. I'm just going to touch on a few things very lightly about it and about how you can customize things. But I want to give you guys a taste of how Pia connects and what it essentially does for you, right? So first things first, we can see we are connected in one very main way for this particular client, and that is via the Graph API, Microsoft Graph API. The API layer, the code level access to Azure AD. In here, we can do everything from pulling lists of users, updating users, resetting passwords, creating new users. So even just for a cloud-only and Azure AD-based environment, they submit that form. The engineer gets a little prompt within your PSA. So whichever PSA you're using, we're going to appear in there as a little pod, and Pia's going to say, hey, they've submitted this form via CloudRadial. Here's all the details. Here's the user I want to create. These are the checks that I've run. Are you happy for me to do so? Engineer doesn't need to connect into the client's environment. For those security conscious among you, the engineer doesn't even need access to that client's environment. That can all be done through Pia. They basically get a little prompt that says, yes, that looks good to me. Hit go, and Pia connects, starts running the process, starts creating the account, their mailboxes, the groups, everything like that. And it does that via the Graph API. Now, of course, not all clients are going to be based purely in Azure. So we do also have a local agent as well. This agent sits on your primary DC, as well as another server that runs your Azure AD Connect, or I believe they call it Entra ID Sync now. I'll definitely remember that name just by the time they roll out the new name, and I forget that one immediately in typical fashion. But we have agents that sit on those machines. So the engineer does not need to go to the local device. Again, they don't need to have access to those local servers. They just tell Pia what they need to do. Pia has all that information from the CloudRadial form already, and it just goes ahead and does it. Now, of course, that's already pretty powerful, right? We don't need the engineer to do that. They pretty hit a button, and then they go off and do another ticket, do another task while that's working away in the background. But of course, not every user is created equal. Not every client has the same user onboarding process. There's a lot of nuances, a lot of small differentiations client to client to client that you need to be able to take into account. So if we go a little bit deeper than this particular dashboard here, we're going to go into this configuration menu. Now, again, as Ricky mentioned, if you guys want a much deeper dive, we'll go through, we'll set up a client, we'll run some of these things. We can definitely do that for you. But I just want to give you a bit of a taste of all the things you can change and override on a per client basis. And the form itself, I'm not going to go through all of them. There's quite a lot in here, but I'll give you a taste of some of the coolest stuff. So things, even just basic stuff like username format, right? I'm sure no one out there has clients that all use the same username format. I'm sure that would be nice. But ultimately, they're going to have a whole different bunch of arrays kind of going on there. So you can tell Pia which format you want the username based in. What to do if it finds a duplicate. Do we add a number? Do we add a little bit more name conventions in there? What do we do? You can tell Pia to change how the Exchange licenses are managed if we want any additional attributes. There's a whole bunch of ID opt-ins and features you can turn off and on and stuff like this. Huge amount of data you can do in here. And one thing I do want to show you guys specifically is something that's relatively new to smartphones, and indeed extended to that CloudRadial integration as well, is license provisioning. So if you have a CSP, maybe you buy your Microsoft licenses through Microsoft or Pax8 or Ingram or one of these services here, you can actually tell Pia on behalf of us, when they create a new user, go off and procure the license for us. Increment that subscription by one. Again, another thing the engineer doesn't have to be aware of, doesn't have to have access to. They can just have the ability to say, yep, that's what I want to do. Pia's already been pre-approved to make these changes, and it's just something else that doesn't need to happen, doesn't need to invoke that extra time and responsibility from the engineers. And one final note that I do want to mention in here as well, if we come down, is these access levels. Now, as we saw in the form, there's actually a couple of ways to create users through this form, through CloudRadial. And that's either to copy an existing user from the AD. Again, Pia pulls the information, presents that through into the portal. But you can also create what are called access levels, essentially templates for different types of users. So you may have it where they just submit a form and say, hey, Jim's starting and he's going to be part of our sales team. Sarah's starting, she's going to be one of our admins. Typically, that means you have to refer to some documentation or find another user account who has the same level of access to assume all the whole same kind of stuff. But in Pia, you can create these kind of templates. And you can say, right, well, they're going to be an engineer. I'll just select engineer. Or rather, they'll select engineer because it's presented in the form of the CloudRadial side. And hit go, and Pia knows all of the groups, the settings, even the license and shared mailbox access they should have, and will apply that to the user. Engineer just basically just gets a little list, a little checklist of items that's done there. And they say, hey, you know what? This looks good to me. Away you go. And Pia will do all of the work for you. So it's taking that process. CloudRadio's always taken us way over the line. They've gone all of that distance to get all the information in the format that you need it. Because how many times have you had someone say, hey, Jim's coming in sales, his manager's going to be Rebecca. Oh, there's about 5 Rebeccas at this company. Fantastic. Now I need to start digging around to find out who's who. No, they just pick the exact user from the list. Easy peasy, right? You get absolutely everything that you need. Pia just takes that ball, runs with it to the end, and essentially completes that process for you. Now, one more thing I want to throw at you. I realize time-wise we are a bit tight here, so one more thing I want to throw at you guys as well, something I haven't touched on, is something called zero touch. This is essentially where we close that circle, right? The process that I spoke about just then is that they open up CloudRadial, they fill out the form, they have all the details. You get that in the tickets created in your system in the format that you expect. And Pia's sitting there saying, hey, I have all these details, I've grabbed all this information. Do you want me to go ahead? Engineer says yes or no. Now, for a lot of these accounts, a lot of these kind of processes, user account maybe is a little bit more complex. But for something like maybe setting it out of office, unlocking an account, giving someone calendar or mailbox access, you don't really need the engineer to okay every single request that comes through. So if you turn on zero touch, Pia will automatically action that request when it comes through and can even close that ticket for you. CloudRadial raises up, gives us all the details, Pia knocks it down. Entire process complete. Engineer doesn't see the ticket, doesn't need to touch it. Time is automatically logged to the ticket for that client, for that contact. Request is complete, and ultimately they're happy at the end of the day, right? That ticket is closed maybe minutes after they've raised it. So that is some of the awesome power you can kind of do by combining these two systems here. And honestly, I'd love to go in a lot more detail for it. I know time-wise we're tight, but if you guys are interested in getting maybe an hour-long webinar where we go a lot deeper with this, we do a lot of playing, we do a couple of these kind of forms, definitely let us know, because I'd be more than happy to come back and kind of do that with you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, and there's, again, we're cognizant. I know it's not intended to be a frustrating tease, but that was kind of the reason when we looked at this webinar. Again, I'll talk about from the CloudRadial side. We had so many questions about automation and the power of automation, how you get it, and how you get the zero touch. So I'll show one more thing, I think, to help paint a better picture. So what Tom's talking about is you can tell that there's a lot of potential power. There's a lot of ways you can take this to empower the end users to really handle these really common requests. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, the way that people come to CloudRadial a lot are, looking for typically that self-service onboarding is a really big one, meaning that like onboarding users and whatnot. The logistics of how we get there is important because like you saw, in Tom's view, right? In your view, if you get Pia, you have that setup. You're doing a lot of details that CloudRadial just straight up does not have the power to do, and that's why it's so powerful. So you can see that the reason that we flash this, like on one side, let's call it the dummy side, that's me. I don't know any of that, right? I know what to pass. I have the authentication of the user. We take care of the place where they live and they breathe and they access these forms. But just like he was showing, all those intelligent mechanisms come back, and to be able to invoke those, I'm gonna have this thing stop popping up. I don't know if you guys can see it. I keep getting pop-ups of polls. Thank you for doing the poll. But to be able to copy the existing employees or whatever and have this be something super, super simple for an end user is our goal, right? We want the complexity and the power to happen in the side of the tool that requires it, and the simplicity of those that are going through it to happen in an area that strips out all the stuff. Logistically, this is another question I get a lot. How these forms operate and the setup of them is not complex, right? So I'll flash this for a moment just to showcase how we attribute stuff. So the name of the game, like Tom wisely said, is not just saying the form exists, because what we come into a lot with people is we say, okay, we're working with an MSP. They have dozens, hundreds of clients potentially, right? The nuances between client A and their onboarding form and client B sometimes are none, sometimes there's a lot. And the way that we end up delivering that is through the content packages that we have. So this is more for existing CloudRadial partners. But the gist is the way that CloudRadial is structured is almost basically completely on a template system, in that when you start with CloudRadial, you get sample stuff. So I'll go into a non-Pia related one as an example, where we look at this form and we say, okay, here's add a new user, remove a user. Again, this is sans automation, right? And you look at it and there's this form builder and there's this concept of building it out. Now, we start you off with the examples to begin your journey with it. And again, leave it up to you if you want to do the built-in automations. But if you take the time to build them in Pia, you see how much extra power you get because you have all those extra connections that are specifically focused on automation. The Pia connection is quite different, right? So Pia Smart Form is you paste an ID and you hit send. So at the end of the day, even the management of those things ends up being dramatically different, and the management of the distribution of them happens within Pia. So again, you basically are shifting the burden, but also the power onto the form creation into Pia. And we've had partners do this, partners that go, hey, I'm ready for that next step up. I'm ready for that zero touch, that self-service, that full power. We don't mind. Again, as much as I would love to take it as an offense that people go, I don't like your forms. I'm like, great, go put in those zero touch forms. They're the ones that your clients are going to get the best power out of. They're the ones that are going to save you the most time. As long as we can have that harmony of people come into the portal, they access them. Again, we've done the work to put the portal, whether it's in the desktop application, whether it's inside Teams or whatever, these forms are going to get invoked in whatever way you want to and have them display in here. So again, the display process is very simple, but I leave it up to you. Again, not trying to tease or cut us off, but when we came to the conclusion of like, well, what can we show in 30 minutes? How can we show the logistics and how can we get, deep into it? The reality is you can't really get into the super unique use cases in just a short time. So again, please let us know if there's something you want to see, you want us to deconstruct, you want to know exactly how this works, exactly how it looks, the handoff from CloudRadial, the form building in Pia. We're more than happy to show that. And this is kind of our way of letting you know it's possible. People are doing it. People are getting insane value out of it, but we need to know what you want to see. Now, unfortunately for poor Crystal, who is trying to manage the questions, I see a lot of questions popping up and then we're like, oh, we'll do a Q&A. And I purposely said like, will we? Because there's not that much time. But I'll say for Crystal, if you can hear me, I'll invoke your ghost voice. Is there anything that you feel like we should answer right now before we cut off? Because again, I know there's so many questions coming up and we want to get to them. So worst case scenario, we can always email you after because we have the names of people that are asking the questions. But anything you think is pertinent to answer on the call by chance?
I'm looking at the questions and I think we've done a great job of answering them. And thank you for answering the polls because that's helpful as well.
Yes.
Just kind of scrolling through here real quick. No, I think you guys covered everything for today.
Okay, sweet. And again, I'm aware that you guys probably asked something saying, what is the specifics of the authentication or the graph connection asking for what permit? There's always stuff like that. Again, I'm not dodging it. I'm not a very good politician. I can't really do a lot of deflecting. I just say, I don't know. I'm sorry, I'll get to it. But please join us for another deep dive. I'm sure we'll be doing one. I'd love to do another meeting, especially with Tom, because he really knows his stuff. And we can get into the logistics of how that looks at scale. So again, it's not just about offering automation for automation's sake. It's about doing it intelligently. What are the most common requests? How do you deploy those? How do you set those up to be the most noisy tickets? How do you visualize the most noisy tickets and go from there? So all these things are more questions before you tackle automation of what do you want to automate? And that's something that we're more than happy to go over. So I know we're running short on time. If there's anything else, Tom and maybe James, you want to plug, now's the time. And if not, I say thank you for joining us either way, but I'll leave it up to you. Any plugs for upcoming webinars or anything for you guys?
Sure. I'll always take the opportunity to do a plug, Ricky. You know that. So, guys, like Ricky said, fantastic marriage here between Pia and CloudRadial. The Crystal put the link in the chat for the demo. So book a demo, get a full deep dive with one of our product specialists, such as Tom and an array of others. We will be at IT Nation next week. So if anyone's going to be there in Orlando, come and join us, swing by the booth. And on our website, pia.ai, you can register for any upcoming office hours where we do specific deep dives into various features of the Pia platform. So thanks again, Ricky.
Of course. Thank you guys. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, James. I'll catch you for the next one. Again, hopefully, if you guys are interested and want to see some deep dive, we'll be announcing that at some point too. So maybe one, maybe multiple. I'm always happy to host, or maybe I'll join your hosted webinars. But either way, I'll see you guys for the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.